Shall we begin, Nancy?
Yes, yeah, let's begin.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming in. I am the moderator for now, and I'll leave in a few minutes. I'll turn my webcam off. So, yes, let's welcome Chinmay first. Hello, Chinmay. Thank
Hi.
you for being here. Thank you for agreeing to do this. And many congratulations on your book, India Moving. I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but the reviews that I'm hearing are amazing. So yes, and I think let's begin. So this is going to be a session wherein he's going to talk for some time, and then we'll have a question and answer round. So everybody who is present here, if at all you have any questions at any point of time, you can send it to us on the questions tab that you might be seeing on the right side of your screen. So yes, thank you, Chinmay. Let's begin.
Hi, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. Just for those who don't know, I've been working on migration as a topic for over 10 years now, covering both internal and international migration in various aspects. And I also had the opportunity to serve on a government policy document twice in 2016 when we estimated the sort of number of migrants in India across different dimensions, and then 2017 where there was a working group report on migration where we came out with India's first policy document on what should be done for migrant workers. Now, I'm starting off with this because in the context, of course, is this massive migration crisis, which is ongoing right now as we speak in India, where literally, millions of people are stuck. And we know for a fact, as for the government of India's sort of submission to the Supreme Court, that about 600,000 people across 22,000 camps are stranded. So it's quite a miserable situation. And today, of course, the lockdown extension has been announced, which means for until May 3rd, these 600,000 people are still going to be stranded in these camps. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this has happened. And while not sort of blaming the government, to also to kind of point out some obvious errors which have been made in handling this situation. So let me start, of course, by just pointing out the sort of double standards in treatment of migrants, that is the international migrant versus the internal migrants. You remember that in Feb, early March, India had actually sent planes to Italy, to Iran, where high sort of virus transmission had taken place to get back these international travelers. You see that it took almost a month or 40 days of messaging on international travelers. First, a few countries were barred, then more countries were barred. There's a lot of back and forth signaling. Other countries themselves, UK, for example, gave 1 week's notice for all students to leave the country, international students to leave the country. And of course, despite all this, a few people were stranded, and you'll see student groups in the US who are trying to get back to India. So that's also there. But what I'm trying to say is that in the case of international migrants, we not only gave a lot of time, it was very much phased. And most importantly, when these people came back, there were simple norms on social distancing and 14 days of self-quarantine, which people had to follow. And we definitely did not see scenes of people at airports being, sprayed with disinfectants and so on. Some of those ghastly sights that that we've seen with internal migrants. And now, when we come to internal migrants, and again, let me go step by step. You'll also remember that we were given about 4 days notice for this Thali Bajao plate banging event, and then again we got many days notice to light diyas. In which case, the power grid, people had to work on that Sunday to ensure the power grid was working. So on events that which were inconsequential to some extent, a lot of planning. And on events of the scale of lockdown, which is probably unprecedented, first time, etc., it did seem that very little thought had gone to it, especially in connection with internal migrant workers. And so what we saw was that on March 24th, 8 p.m., India essentially got 4 hours of notice period, saying that there's going to be a lockdown for 21 days starting from tomorrow. And probably the first time in Indian history of 150 years of the Indian Railways were shut down. Now, note that the Indian Railways is not just a means of transport. It's a symbol of hope. It's a symbol of much. It's a huge symbol. It's the lifeline of migrant workers. And to shut it down with absolutely no notice period was a huge issue. Note, of course, that there were also huge, you know, an exodus had already begun before the lockdown. So many people, think that the government could not have seen or anticipated the scale of the exodus. But that's not true, because actually 4 days before this eventual lockdown, people had started making plans to go back home and so on. Now, when the government did lockdown finally on March 24th, the lockdown speech actually didn't have anything by way of assurances on both supplies and for migrant workers in terms of incomes, in terms of, it was just a simple lockdown speech. And immediately, the Prime Minister's social media handles realized that there was a complete chaos because people had started stepping out to hoard essential items and so on. So that period from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock, people suddenly they forgot social distancing. People just started going out to buy stuff. Now, this was like the middle class, people who were in cities and so on. And immediately the Prime Minister started responding through social media saying, no need to hoard, we've got enough supplies. This was not communicated well enough in the speech. What happened the next day, of course, was something, which I think a lot of middle class people did not expect, were these disturbing visuals which started coming up on media of people walking back home. Or trying to get to a place where they could get some transport back home. And we're talking about huge distances. We're talking about distances of more than 100 kilometers. By walking is not a joke. In some cases, at least yesterday, a guy reached Orissa after cycling for 1,700 kilometers. So crazy stories. And for the next 4 days, what we saw was what I think, in terms of numbers, clearly is the greatest, in a way, involuntary exodus of humankind since arguably the partition. And again, out here, there are two, views for those who say that the lockdown was not well planned, but the government had no choice. That this whole exodus was essentially a Delhi-based phenomenon, and so in fact, there's a whole line of argument saying, why did we see such things in other places? So that means Delhi must have made some mistakes, and Arvind Kejriwal must have made some mistakes, or it is a Delhi-specific issue. And two, the argument was that the government had no way of knowing so many migrant workers existed and so on. And of course, both these arguments are seriously flawed. And so what I'd just like to highlight is that this is not a Delhi specific issue. The migration crisis ongoing, I'm not saying it's over. The ongoing migration crisis of India is firstly not Delhi specific. You saw the main exodus come in three cities, in Mumbai, in Surat, in Delhi. And all these three cities have one thing in common, that is, they have a huge percentage of its workforce coming from other states, not other districts of the same state, but other states of India, mainly UP, Bihar, even West Bengal, Odisha, and so on. The other thing is, a huge part of the workforce comes from other rural areas. So, unlike Hyderabad, Bangalore, where most of the migrant workforce actually comes from other urban areas. So there's a huge qualitative difference in terms of migrants. And because the lockdown implied a sealing of interstate borders, people were desperate to go to the state border. And that's why, because Delhi is unique in terms of being a city state, people were just desperate to get to the UP border, thinking that once they cross the border by road, they'll get some transport within UP. Note that millions of people actually walked within states. Right, so this has happened in Maharashtra, this has happened from, say, Bombay to Konkan, this has happened in Karnataka, this has happened in Tamil Nadu. So the number we're talking about in terms of people who had to walk back is in the millions. The number of people, of course, what happened then was a strict lockdown. And the whole rationale of not letting migrant workers go back is also interesting. The logic is that since rural health infrastructure is so bad, that if this virus is taken by the migrants back home, it will lead to an absolute chaos. And while there might be some merit in that argument, it's now increasingly clear that it was not the right call to make for the simple reason that at that point the virus infection rates in India were fairly low, right? In the sense that in middle of March, we still did not have a very, very high rate of virus transmission, and we had already let international people come back. So there was this hypocrisy not letting our own internal migrants go back, but letting international migrants come in. But now we've created a new problem because we are so hung up on this idea that migrants would be irresponsible if they go back. We are actually created a situation where we have these 20,000 camps fairly congested, where it's very tough to maintain social distancing. And so the argument is that if one of these migrant workers does have this virus, the fact is that today actually we made it an even more potential explosive situation by having these camps, because they're high density sort of camps. Whereas if they actually went to their villages, and if social distancing, self quarantining measures are followed, you would probably have lesser sort of issues to deal. So this idea that if the migrant workers are infected, which is the best place for them to be, is somewhat, I think, misplaced. And so far, we are surprisingly seeing literally, no cases of infection in among migrant workers. So I think, on hindsight, of course, it's much easier to say. But I think even at that point, the government of India should have given a few days for people to go back home. Now, what we have faced actually is a situation where people are desperate to go back home. You talk to people. Of course, I'm pretty much locked down at home, but not only reading newspaper reports, but on the phone talking with a variety of people who are working on the ground, you realize that the situation in these camps is really bad. The government has now come out with assurances of food, ration, etc. But I mean, people had planned for April 14th, so now there's a new anger that it's going to go on till May 3rd. And this assurance of supplies is not enough. A lot of times these supplies, it's more of a photo op rather than any meaningful supplies. And so every additional day of this lockdown is really going to sort of hurt. Now, which are the major clusters in which this is hurting? In Gujarat, we know for a fact Surat, for example, we've seen unrest already unfold in Surat. We've seen people coming out on the streets, just asking the government a very simple thing: just arrange a train or two, some buses, like the UP government actually had done, and we'll go home and we'll maintain all these things about social distancing, self quarantining. Just trust us that we will go home and do all these things, just like you trusted international migrants to do the same. But of course, now because one has to enforce this lockdown, the government, the police is just doing its job in ensuring that the migrant workers don't leave. And so you have this bizarre cases of literally riots in Surat, where the migrants are literally fighting with the police, saying just let us go back. So a couple of things that have happened with the lockdown. Because it did not, I think this was really bad advice given to the Prime Minister in terms of what should be done with migration. If you thought that there was no way to anticipate what was happening, I say huge problem in that, for the simple reason that I was myself involved with two government efforts. That is the 2016 economic survey, where we put out the numbers on migration. So there's no way, and this got wide media coverage in 2016. So there's no way the government could not have known the numbers. There are over 55 million people who moved for economic reasons in India. We are saying there are over 100 million circular migrant workers in India, and this was a huge. This got huge media attention in 2016. And 2017, the report that we put out on migration had coordination from 8 ministries and departments, right? So Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Urban Welfare, a variety of ministries that were part of that effort. And this year, in fact, there's a scheme that was supposed to be launched called the One Nation, One Ration Card scheme, which makes social security portable for migrant workers. So this is a wonderful policy, and it should happen, which means migrants can access ration anywhere, whereas right now they can access it only in the source region. So these three sort of events tell me that the government obviously had a clue about the scale of migration in India, the issues that that are involved out here, and so announcing the lockdown with absolutely no assurances given to migrant workers was very, very badly thought out. The assurances came only 4 days later. So for those 4 days between March 24th and March 28th, the assurance came on March 29th. It was complete mayhem, and so that's when you saw those disturbing visuals of people walking back home. On March 29th, the government came out with a circular which basically said that the lockdown has to be enforced, so nobody can go back home. And now we will provide assurance that state governments have to do what it takes basically to ensure that food supplies are given to these migrants. And that's when you saw chief ministers start tweeting about, so many. So Maharashtra government said, there were 5 lakh people stuck here. And we are doing everything we can to assure them. So suddenly the language started to change. Suddenly KCR in Telangana started talking about migration, migrants. We are going to serve them as one of us. In fact, Kerala started calling migrants as guest workers, saying that we should be treating that as how we would be treating again. So that language started to change after a few days, and I think the media played a tremendous role in bringing these stories out, especially in Delhi. So unfortunately, many people thought it was only a Delhi event because of sort of media bias of Delhi. But in general, it was across the board, and of course we've seen this in Gujarat as well. In Gujarat, for instance, people walk from Ahmedabad and the northern places to Rajasthan. So the migrants from UP and Bihar obviously have not gone back home because it's too long to walk. It's not rational. But for Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, people actually did walk back home. And so you have these huge, columns of people going on the highways towards the Rajasthan border. We've seen these, disturbing visuals. What's also disturbing is that a lot of these migrants, I mean, they have a huge sense of dignity, and all of them have a simple question on their mind, saying, why are we made to walk home? Why couldn't just some basic transport options have been arranged? And I mean, they understand this issue, that it's a very tough issue, but this idea of lack of planning. The other thing migrants are, saying is, and this is an important phrase I think in this whole COVID-19 discourse, कि ये जो बीमारी है ये अमीरों की बीमारी है, and the migrants feel that this sort of disease is not related with them. Obviously now medically this is simply not true. I mean, the virus doesn't see class level, but it's a fact, of course, that the virus has come from outside and from relatively well-off people. And so there's again this deep sense of distrust of migrant workers, saying that why are we made to go through hell in order to safeguard the rich from a particular disease, which is I think a very interesting perception battle which is going on. Now, of course, a lot of migrants are saying that we understand that this is a fight against the virus, but we are basically fighting 2 battles. One is against starvation and one is against the virus. And so if we don't die from the virus, we will die from the starvation or from garibhi. And we've already started seeing, and so there's one study which shows that while I think about 300 virus-related deaths, I think now one can attribute at least 200 deaths in the last few weeks to measures of the lockdown, which means basically people who've completely lost jobs, committed suicide, etc. But most importantly, people who've died of exhaustion by walking, right? And so that number now is more than 200. So we're saying that as of now, the number of people who've died because of the badly planned lockdown is just about the same as the number of people who died from the virus. So this is a very stark sort of thing. But of course, hopefully the number of, I mean, this is not the right way to see this, because the number of virus deaths could be potentially, in the tens of thousands, like what we're seeing in other countries. But it's a fact that in India, you can't simply lock down without thinking of livelihoods, because if the daily wage worker is not getting money, it is a really horrendous situation to be in. And so it's, while from from a medical perspective, it makes a lot of sense. From a sort of simple economic perspective, it also ensures what it does is, while people might not be dying, people are cutting back on consumption, people are cutting back on food. And so what you're going to see is basically a massive rise in malnutrition, which has its own knock-on effects. So there are, literally hundreds of thousands of pregnant mothers in India right now who are eating lesser and lesser every day in various parts of India. And so that has a natural effect on the health of not only the women, but the children that they're going to give birth to in a bit. And especially daily wage workers, who form more than 10% of India's urban workforce. Right now, it's a really bad situation to be in. So just to give you a sense of some of the numbers, again, more than 100 million circular migrant workers in India. We're seeing the interstate migrants, the numbers, again, running in many millions. In terms of people who went back, we don't know exactly. Luckily, Holi, the festival of Holi happened, second week of March. So a lot of people usually go back for Holi. And so many people also before the lockdown were actually in their source regions. So they had already made the trip back home. But we know for a fact that, easily millions and millions of people right now are stuck in cities. And we know in addition that about 600,000 people, and this is a very minimal number, I would say, because Maharashtra government itself is saying over 5 lakh, that there are these many numbers who are stranded. So this is the case of the stranded migrants who are not in their homes or in their rental sort of accommodation place in their destination site. They're stranded in more than 20,000 camps. What we've essentially done is in a way create a new crisis, which was not really needed. And in my opinion, there has to be a way of disbanding these camps at the earliest. I thought that today's speech would have something on that. I didn't see anything. So which means that these camps will continue till May 3rd. And if, God forbid, somebody has an infection, a virus in these camps, it's going to spread a lot simply because these camps don't really have, I mean, they're fairly congested. There are also other arguments that, not government schools have not been used for this. So these camps are also not, usually in good sites. What is heartening in this whole process, of course, the responses of many state governments who have suddenly been very receptive of migrants. Most famously, Maharashtra, which has a huge history of anti-migrant sentiment. So the Bhumi, I mean, it's basically the Sons of the Soil movement, which has been very strong. And so to see a person from the Shiv Sena talk about, receiving migrants and giving them a lot of respect, you see these kind of, sea changes which is happening. I think what the crisis will hopefully force the government to do is to realize the really precarious nature of jobs in which migrant workers work and roll out a massive social security measure. From what we have been advocating for years now, this means portable social security, which means you should be able to access anything, which is insurance, subsidized food, whatever it is, health benefits, anywhere in India. Right, so it doesn't matter whether if you're from some village in Bihar, you should be able to access social security anywhere in India. And that is the dream project. And so hopefully this crisis will awaken the government to eventually roll this out this year. But overall, the situation right now is very, very precarious. And of course, I'll be happy to take questions on why people are migrating and what more can be done. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chinmay. That was very insightful. Okay, so to begin with questions, today the Prime Minister announced that the lockdown is going to be extended for until 3rd May, and with absolutely no provisions on transportation or no announcements on how he's going to deal with the migrant issue. So, what are the biggest concerns that we're looking at right now on the migrant workers?
I think every additional day of the lockdown extension is, it's like a ticking bomb. And you've seen this in Surat. There's only that much you can tell people, stay here. So what this extension means is that the trains are not going to work. The flights are not going to work. I thought they should have at least had a few special trains to get these people back home, but clearly that's not the thing. So what it means that these people have to be in these camps doing nothing for a long period of time. And I think I'm pretty sure you'll see some social unrest building up or being quelled down in a very violent way. In Surat also, a lot of people were detained by the police. So it's a very unfortunate situation. Now that it's a government order, they have to enforce it, which means, people will simply not be allowed to go back home. What it also means is, for the labor market, if, for example, we had allowed these migrant workers to go home initially itself, they would have been home, they would have been with their families, like so many of us are now with our families. And it would have been a nice time of sort of resting and healing and just, being with family, such that once the lockdown period, they would have actually come back to the cities to work. Now we're in a situation where, because we've kept them stranded for so long, there's also psychological impact, and all of them are desperate to go back home. So for those who have not gone back home, they will go back home the minute the lockdown is released. And so what we're going to get bizarrely on May 3rd or May 4th is, if the lockdown is actually lifted then, is that you'll say, okay, now go back to work, but you're not going to have any work available in cities because this huge migrant labor is actually gone back to the villages. It's also interesting because the migration calendar is such that most of these migrants go back anyways, middle of May, June, and then come back only in August, late August, September. So it's like the rice sowing season usually. And so what this means is that, what migrants are going to do is delay their plans of going back with all this uncertainty. So what we're going to see is huge shortages of labor, especially the construction sector is going to be hit very hard. So even if we say that May 3rd lockdown will get over and let's get back to work, we're going to find the economy crushed so badly. Simply because there's going to be no migrant workers, and we're going to realize the value of migrant workers really on May 4th, when we all start working again, outside our homes if the lockdown is removed, and find that there are no cab drivers. There's this whole informal economy which sustains Indian cities, India's manufacturing clusters, is simply not there. What will eventually get the migrant workers back, of course, is a wage hike, which will happen because if there's a labor shortage, what will happen is that the price of labor will start going up, and that will eventually induce people to come back. But there's a huge adjustment period. And because it coincides with the time of the year where the migrants are anyway back home, I think what we're going to see is a lot of months of labor shortage coming forward. So again, the timing is not perfect in terms of announcing this lockdown. So yeah.
All right. So you also mentioned that around 20,000 camps were there wherein these migrant workers are staying in congested situations. What about the ones who are not in such camps? So recently, Supreme Court also ordered to ensure that proper medication and proper food and shelter was provided to them who are there in the relief camps. What about the workers who are not there and are staying in just any accommodation that they have found?
Yeah, I mean, from all practical perspective, the social distancing thing is just unenforceable. You can't say stay at home and enforce social distancing because the home in the city for most of these people, I mean, in Surat, the Odia migrants, there are 8 people to a room. Right. So it's and if you see the videos of desperation which are coming out on social media and so on, you'll see like there are 8 people, they're all wearing masks and they're doing their. But just the fact that we have, and this points to a larger problem in India of lack of affordable housing, lack of rental housing options. It means that these are social distancing is good in theory, but in practice it's almost unenforceable. Dharavi is a classic case. Dharavi in Asia's biggest slum supposed to be in Bombay, which doesn't
Yes.
have too many migrants, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of Dharavis, people who are born there. We're talking of something like 8 lakh people in 2 square kilometers. So enforcing social distancing out there is almost impossible. What you can just try and do is, if you want to contain the virus and some people are infected, is just to ask people not to go home. But it's almost going to be impossible to let people not be within sort of literally touching distance of each other. So to your larger question of how are these people living in how they do usually, which is in very congested site, and it points to a larger issue which I'd like to just touch upon, that we are in the middle of a pandemic, so obviously the focus is on fighting this virus. But what's interesting is that after this pandemic, the migrant workers will come back and they will live in these congested sites and pick up all sorts of other infections, which is a huge public health issue, which does not usually get attention. And those death rates are staggeringly high as well. I mean, just one classic example being tuberculosis, which is again not transmitted in the same way as this, but tuberculosis is unfortunately like a poor person's disease. And TB claims 1,000 lives in India every day. That's the statistic. Hopefully we're not going to see these death rates in terms of the COVID virus, but there is a larger public health issue around migrant workers in particular in so-called normal times as well. And because the normal is actually not normal for these people, because they take it as normal, but these are unusually high death rates in even non-COVID time conditions. So there is an issue of obviously accommodation, which is simply not there for the bulk of the migrant workers.
So we're talking about the whole idea that this crisis could have been avoidable had there been better policy measures or better instructions that could have been given. Could you just explain a little bit more about what all could we have done to ensure that they were back at their home safely?
Firstly, a policy thinking of, should we let go of these migrant workers or should we contain them? Now, again, let me start by saying that literally any policy the government takes during a pandemic is going to be criticized. Okay, so if the government had, told migrant workers, okay, go home, we would have said no, no, but then they're taking the virus back home. If they told them to stay there, then we're saying, there's economic hardship. So these are hard trade-offs that any government has to make. But I think the lockdown speech in particular was really badly planned. And because for the simple fact that there was literally no assurance, and that led to panic. The assurances came 4 days late. March 29th, the circular came. The other thing was, in terms of messaging, all countries have a press conference, and we know, of course, our prime minister is not given a press conference in a long time. But this shows you the value of a press conference, because the first thing a journalist would ask is, okay, you've announced lockdown. What measures would you have taken? What do we tell migrant workers? And then the prime minister would be forced to think. In terms of communication, I think the lockdown speech was very badly drafted. Even on the supplies end, for middle class people, it was not well thought out, and that's why you saw people on the streets immediately. So that is one in terms of communication. Two, they should have clearly announced that, what they announced 4 days later, that two things. One is that wages have to be paid, which is again easier said than done, because we know for a fact that wages are not being paid. And two, what they announced eventually was a 1 month rental waiver, which is also a very good policy, but it's almost impossible to implement. And one of the reasons people started to leave and start walking was because their landlords evicted them, saying if you can't pay, then you need to leave. But I think giving some assurances on these things would have reduced the scale of the instant flight that one saw. Irrespective of what the government would have done, even a very well thought out speech, even with everything, you would have still seen some migrant exodus, for the simple reason that, very normal tendency among human beings to be with family during times of crisis. But the way I see it, for migrants, social security is usually back home in terms of both family, being there, but also the government provisions, ration, rice, etc. And economic security is in the city. So social security in the village, economic security in the city. But because there's no assurance on the economic security, people fled for the social security back. And so definitely better messaging, more assurances in the lockdown speech would have reduced the need for this. There's a larger question of whether the lockdown is necessary or not. I take the view that it was a bold and good decision to go for a lockdown, but they should have had a transitory period where transport was still open and where people could go back home and observe, of course, these self-isolation quarantining rules, which was given, by the way, to international travelers. I think the real stark hypocrisy out here was the way the government treated international travelers vis-a-vis domestic travelers and migrants. So that, I think, was very stark. On a larger level, yes, this portable social security, if it was implemented earlier, people would have had access to cheap food within cities. That would have given more economic security to migrants and less sort of need for instant flight. So I think these are the sort of this is how I'm sort of thinking about this. But I think it's very easy to criticize the government on a variety of things. But I'm also well, cognizant of the fact that there were some very, very hard trade-offs that any policymaker has to take in such a period.
Okay. So coming back to the speech delivered today, there was also the mention that on the 28th of April, there will be a reassessment. Do you see any light there as to, is there a possibility that it could provide something for the workers, whether in terms of the economic and social security, or whether a provision for them to go back?
I don't see I think there's still a distrust in the sense that if people start moving across geographies, they will start taking the virus to those places. I think that's a bit misplaced. I think that's very patronizing. It's not like, these people, now there's good communication. People know about the virus. They're not going to go back and deliberately start mingling around with people. What migrant workers want right now, just to be with their families. They're not going to step out of their homes in the rural areas. In fact, rural areas is lesser density than these camps. So it's, in fact, I would say safer. I would say that there should be some special buses arranged, some special trains, and just disband these camps. I think in a very short term, that is a basic thing. And of course, there's a logistical nightmare. I mean, just feeding these 20,000 camps on a daily basis is somewhat pointless. So I feel solving that one small crisis, not small, big crisis, in the really in between these next 15 days would make a lot of sense. I don't think this idea of containing the people in one place so that the virus doesn't go out of hand and so on is useful. I think you can do it in a fairly orderly sort of fashion. Yeah.
As we saw in the 2016 demonetization effect also, that it was just announced overnight and the next day 80% of India's currency is not valid. Similar goes for how we just have around 4 hours only to prepare for a lockdown that would last initially just 21 days and now it's extended. Is it like really not happening that the government maybe is not really taking the lessons, or is it something that they think they can choose to forego and then not really worry about? What is it on their part that's happening? Because clearly demonetization was a big lesson as to how these sudden announcements impact the country, and especially the one more at the disadvantage.
Yeah,
So why is it repeating?
I think it's repeating because I think the major support base for the prime minister uh, has kind of conveyed that this is great. I mean, we're waiting for you to come on television and announce these dramatic things, whether it's demonetization or Balakot announcement or an announcement like the lockdown. And I think the Prime Minister takes his board base, or rather, the Prime Minister does not have enough critical voices in the cabinet, or just generally in terms of advice, giving provision of advice, such that it's getting reinforced. So this idea of this is classic. There's a Hindi movie called Nayak, in which one person will solve all the problems, one politician will solve all the problems, and this is a personality trait with the way I see it, where I will do everything alone. So I think, and that many people have written that the PMO has been so centralized that alternative views are just not getting the same. So I think unfortunately there's not been much learning since demonetization, and I think what people should be demanding now is press conferences. And if it's a pandemic, then have a e-press conference. If you can have different chief ministers on one screen, and have a meeting with them, have a meeting with journalists, and get. I think that's a quicker sort of I don't know, what do you call it, a reflexive method of communication than this one person sort of messaging. So it's either man ki baat or a broadcast like this. So unfortunately, there's no other way in which I think the PMO, Prime Minister's Office, is getting feedback, which I think is very unfortunate.
Hmm. Okay, so since you mentioned the support base, this particular support base also is like when events like spraying of disinfectants on the migrants happen, when it comes to the criticism of their simple will to just want to go back home, the kind of response that India's people are also sending out to the migrants, I don't really see it as very encouraging. So, what do you possibly think, based on your interactions, could it be doing to their humanity and their sense of faith in how the country treats them?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer. I think you're right that a lot of people, especially what you see on social media, it's very cruel, lack of empathy. But I would more of the good side. I think we are seeing a lot of people understand the value of the migrants. I think the fact that everyone has to work at home, people are complaining that there's no domestic health and so on. I think they're also realizing the value of the amount of contribution that migrant workers make. So there is middle class apathy, but I also think this is a moment where I think a lot of people will start to sort of reflect and see, and check their own sort of privileges and sort of understand or empathize with migrant workers, especially when they come back. So hopefully, I think what this creates, this crisis creates a potential platform going forward for people to point out that India does not have a good social security platform, and for a lot of people who've been working on this for years, to argue with more evidence now that we really require this, and hopefully a lot of the middle class buys. I do think, of course, that the prime minister's lockdown, the fact that in relative terms we might complain that there's not enough testing being done, But in relative terms, India has done relatively better than some of the major countries in the world. It's not the best, but it's somewhere in between. If you see across 100 countries, India is somewhere in between. And so, of course, for that, the Prime Minister is going to take a lot of credit. But I think what people have also seen is the tremendous resolve of the state level governments that have come up in this. But in any case, it's a unique crisis. So, which it's like almost like a once in a century event. And of course, if you compare it to the last pandemic, 1918 influenza, that killed 15 million Indians, or 6% of the population. So this is hopefully not going to be anywhere close to that.
Okay. So what if they do get to go back? What happens when, if at all, there is the provision made for them to go back? Because most of the testing and reports of any policies that are being made to contain the virus are majorly concentrated on the cities. So what happens if at all they get a chance to go back?
No, as with international travelers, some screening mechanism, check temperature, check this thing as hand sanitizer, and ensure that when they reach, the panchayats have to be alerted that these people are coming back, which they've already done, by the way. For those who have returned, there's a database in many states of people who have returned and so on, and they have to stay at home for 2 weeks. So that the simple process that has to be followed. I think now you're not going to see too many events of super spreaders, right? Where you have large gatherings and certain things which we've seen happening in India and South Korea and many places. I think that risk is now much minimal. So the idea should be just ensure that people go back home, and of course have a good communication system that, look, we're letting you go back home, but you need to do X, Y, Z. I think what we need to also convey is, in middle class, upper class circles, often conversations start by, but we're so thankful that, all the families together in this time of crisis. And I think that, that same sentiment is there among migrant workers as well, obviously. And so one has to kind of convey that, look, this is the most humane thing to do, that people want to be with their families during times of a lot of uncertainty. A lot of employers are saying that, stay in the city and let your family back home support you. And that's the most crazy thing, because it's usually the migrant who's supporting the family back home. So there's no way the family back home can support the migrant out here. Which means for those who are stuck in our cities, more has to be done for that.
Okay, so yes, as you highlight, so since they were the major source of earning livelihood for the whole families. What about the families back there in the rural areas? How are they going to cope up with no real income in times like this?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, and I think we are not getting good media focus on rural areas, but there's already signs of huge distress. It's like this. I mean, we say that enough rice. India is lucky that we are sitting on bumper food stocks in the Food Corporation of India. But you need to get rice from one place to another, and if you don't have loaders, something as simple as loading bags onto a truck, you don't have truck drivers, which is the case right now. Then you're not going to be able to get rice from one place to another, and you're slowly seeing these supply chains shrink. So I really don't trust this government's there are enough supplies sort of argument, because the supply chains are thinning as every day is passing by. So rural India is going to get hit. So there have already some people gone back home. More people might go back home. This is April, May is also the time what people call as a slack season, right? I mean, there's really nothing to do in rural areas, especially in the month of May. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that sort of the rural economy plays out in the month of May. June onwards, of course, if things pick up, there's a lot of happiness as the rain comes and so on. But I think for me, I think now May is actually the more crucial month, because I think the lockdown will have to get lifted now. It can't go on. I thought it can't go on beyond April 14th. I can't think of it going beyond May 3rd. And then May is going to be interesting, because you're going to have some demand for labor in cities, but nobody's going to be there. I mean, huge labor shortages. And you're going to have excess labor in rural areas where there's nothing to do. But nobody wants to come back because of this uncertainty. That's my guess. And so we're going to see, huge sort of imbalances in the month of May. and then hopefully, things are under control, things will get better. But this year is going to be very tough for everyone. So whichever sector one is in, it is going to be tough. Whether it's in education, where I'm in, how do we start conducting classes online for thousands of students? To construction industry must be the worst hit. I mean, it's just going to be a bloodbath. And then, just a variety of occupation. The media, we've already seen mass layoffs yesterday in newspapers, companies, and so on. Advertising is hit. I was talking to a person who said that, the television, they're having record viewerships because there's nothing to do. People are watching television, but there's simply no advertisers, which is completely paradoxical. Like, we have record viewership, you should be able to get more advertisers, but this is nobody willing to advertise and so on. So all that the television companies are doing is playing reruns of 20 or 30 years back, or 10 years back shows. So it's a very bizarre economic situation to be, and eventually it's going to bite very badly. So I mean, there will be a lot of deaths related to just the economic repression, suppression that's going on. Yeah.
Okay, so coming on to the state's willingness and how a lot of states have actually reacted very positively. I've been reading some accounts of migrant laborers. So if we're talking about distribution through a token system, not many of them are actually well equipped with smartphones to even go out and register. Similarly, with the food kits being distributed, you're giving out rations of rice and dal, but no actual way of ensuring that they have the fuel to even cook it. So, though there is state action that is being done, and a lot of it has fared well also. But what are they also missing out on, that problems continue to? And I'm not saying that problems just would go away anyways, but why is it that we're actually missing out on the basic things that we need to at least know?
Yeah, I think, see, the way the ration system works is it is geared for domicile people, right? So if you have a ration card, it's very simple. You go, you get it. Now, for domicile people, if you're anyway staying in that place, you have all the cooking facilities and so on. So if you're in a village in Bihar or in Gujarat, you can go to the PDS store, you can get your ration, go back home, you cook it. So it's a very simple model. Now, with migrants who firstly don't have a ration card, but at least for this period now, they're getting free supplies, or not free, but subsidized supplies. The issue is that, of course, a lot of these people actually don't cook home. Usually, there are these huge messes which are now stopped because of the social distancing norms, and they cook in large numbers, in bulk quantities for everyone. So that's what we are hearing ground reports saying that that's happening less, and so there's more pressure for cooked meals. So you see all those dabba kind of meals being served by NGOs, by a variety of people. So of course, it's just rice and dal. But a lot of NGOs are doing tremendous work trying to feed migrant workers. So it's unfortunately it's not as simple as just giving the supplies. You need to be giving the cooked versions of those supplies to them, and so I think that's what a lot of relief work that's happening right now is just that. And I think I was reading a report. In Tamil Nadu, the government is doing most of it. In Kerala, the NGOs are doing most of it. So between NGOs and the government, a lot of this relief work for migrant workers is, and especially for the stranded people. Then, I mean, you're just stranded in the middle of nowhere. So there's literally no cooking facility. So you're literally feeding them these kind of meals for sort of long periods of time. And people are cutting back. People are not happy. I mean, it's the same. I mean, forget the same food bit, but it's not. I mean, people have come to literally one meal a day. And so over time, 1 month shock, it's also a health shock. And that's why I feel the case for disbanding the camps is very strong. Yeah.
Okay. So coming on to post-lockdown, you already mentioned that there's a huge possibility that the migrant workers are not going to come back. So in that situation, when that happens, because they're already out of wages for around 2 months, what ensures their economic security back in that time? Like, wouldn't it be a possibility? Sorry, continue.
Yeah, it's a good question that, because they have nothing, then they'll have to come back fast. I think the issue here is the calendar. So the particular, months of the year, the migrants just, how much ever money you give them, they're not going to come. And there's a particular attachment to the monsoon, to the first rains. You have to be in the village during the first rains. And those are almost like cultural factors which determine location choice. So, as I said, this not coming back is going to be a short-term issue. So let's compare to last year's month of May, there would have been X number of migrant laborers. This year it's going to be, a huge shortage of that particular number. But in June and July, anyway, our calendar is such that construction activity slows down in the months of monsoon. We know that. So there's less demand for migrant laborers and so on, and they're also getting more work in rural areas. So I think this real crunch situation is going to be for 1 month, and then they will eventually come back, but later in the year. And there's also a lot of uncertainty. So they'll go back to the village and say, okay, let things stabilize, and then we'll think of way. Let me also say this, going back to the cities is happened, but it's not happened at a mass systematic level. For example, Surat is a city I've been studying for now a long time. And in Surat, for example, you have a recession every now and then, right? Either in the diamond industry or the power loom industry. And if the power loom industry shut, the Odia migrants basically go back to Odisha. They wait out for 1 or 2 months, and when things are better, they come back. So this idea, so the migrants are used to the idea of uncertainty both in source and destination. What is of course unique this time is that it's pan India, pan sector. It's happening all over. So that is why it's more stark. Yeah.
All right. Cool. So we're moving on to the next session. We have a lot of questions from the audiences. The first one is, could you talk a little about agriculture farmers and the supply chain?
Yeah. So couple of things out here. There is the farmer who has a lot of land. There's the farmer who has little land for subsistence, and then there is the landless laborer. Right? So this is pretty much how we see the labor force of rural India. Now, typically, for example, now the wheat harvesting in Punjab, which is usually takes place now, what we call it the Rabi crop harvest and so on. Now that the farmers have the land and so on, but they require laborers to cut it. And I mean, most farmers are not themselves going. In any case, they can't on their own do the entire fields that they've sort of grown this thing. So now what we're seeing is automatically shortage of agricultural laborers in going and harvesting, and so this is how it affects the harvest. So you might have a good harvest, but it's not harvested because there are no laborers, right? And so this is how it starts affecting the agricultural supply chain. Now, even if it is harvested, then it has to reach all over the wheat from Punjab has to go all over India. For that, you need two important people in this chain, which is the loader and the driver, right? And the loader and the driver are usually migrants, and we know a lot of them have gone back. I mean, you'd be surprised to know there are literally tens of thousands of trucks in India stranded, and the migrants have gone back. Now it's going to take a time for even migrants to come back to the truck. I mean, these are trucks stranded on different highways of India. And so the supply chains are going to be hit, and that's why it's important that some part of the economy starts. I was really hoping that would happen today, but for until May 3rd, the supply chains are going to continuously shrink, contract, and so all these notions of even a good harvest. The fact that you see these things on your field, but you can't look at mangoes now. I mean, this is the mango season. All of us love mangoes, and we're going to eat very few mangoes this time. Not because the mangoes are not grown, but because who's going to pluck the mangoes? In Ratnagiri, for example, which is the home of the great Alfonso mango, every year there are about 70,000 Nepali workers who are called they basically are the guards, because otherwise this whole crop is damaged by monkeys. And these are the guys who sort of safeguard it. Now the 70,000 odd Nepali workers, I'm guessing, are not there this year. Which means that this whole so-called mango orchards are going to be destroyed by a lot of animals and so on. So this is how the agricultural economy is very complex. A lot of factors that go in. But the fact that you don't have particular occupations, in this case guards, in the case of wheat, cutters, which are agricultural laborers, loaders, and drivers, means that slowly, all the supply chains are going to get hit tremendously. And so that's how I see this thing. The worst hit will be the laborer, because the laborer is not getting any daily wage income. And so what does the laborer do? Basically cut back on consumption and live on ration food for long periods of time. And so you have a public health issue, the growing levels of malnutrition.
Hmm. So, because what all could be the possible repercussions of not just the laborers but the country in general? What crisis in terms of the economic crunch that's going to happen in the longer term, or say in the coming quarters, are we looking at?
Yeah, I mean, see, without a massive, and I mean a truly massive social security boost, which literally means giving people, 1,000 or 10,000 rupees in their bank accounts,
Hmm.
there is going to be an economic disaster. I mean, I can't see any way that the economy can just start, on its own and running, because our export markets are hit, the whole global economy is down. So we're almost headed for a recession, which India has not had since, 1978 or something.
Hmm.
So unless there's this massive, and the social security package announced by the government is very thin.
Hmm.
So the government has to forego all its commitments to deficit to GDP ratios. So we say prudent government. There's a law in India which says that the deficit to GDP ratio should not be above a particular percentage. I think the time has come to sort of dismiss all those targets. These are extraordinary times, and you need to basically borrow money from financial institutions by the government. This is classic sort of economics, which tells you that when investment sentiments are low, and note that these sentiments were low even before the pandemic. So India's economy was
Hmm.
not doing well even before the pandemic. This is a classic case for the government to step in a big way and actually enforce a lot of things which many of us have been arguing for a long time. That is to have more social security, so that this whole precarious nature of work is not there, which means people have some assured sense of income. Think of it as this monopoly or business game. Every time you go on that start sign, you get 200 rupees. You're assured of that basic thing which takes you on for the next round. And that, I think, it's time for this what people are calling as the universal basic income. And it's very interesting because this is a time when economists who never agree with each other on anything are almost
Hmm.
unanimous saying that this has to be done. I mean, you'll have like the left-based economists who will say, just give money to the poor, versus the sort of right-wing economists who will say, no, no, we need prudence, others it will lead to runaway inflation. All of
Hmm.
the economists are saying, the government has to step in a big way, and the numbers which were rolled out earlier by the finance
Hmm.
ministry are too low. So barring
Hmm.
that, I think we have a full-scale economic disaster. So hopefully some sense prevails, and a lot of good steps are taken. But whatever happens, there are going to be mass layoffs. There's going to be more unemployment, and so those issues are going to be there.
So in terms of the public health issues that the migrant laborers would be facing after this, the malnutrition, I don't really see it anywhere in the popular debate. So what kind of difficulties is that sector going to face? Because those are the issues that we don't really discuss in general also. The issue, like, such issues don't even get
True.
the media limelight.
True. I mean, again, this is an issue even before the pandemic.
Hmm.
And there was a study in Ahmedabad which showed that health levels of kids of construction workers, on all construction sites of Ahmedabad, for example, you have these
Hmm.
children who are working, and their health levels are on par with kids in sub-Saharan Africa, which are really some of the worst health indicators in the world. Now
Hmm.
you have a pandemic, in which case people's access to food, how
Hmm.
many times you take the meal is also curtailed more.
Hmm.
So, I mean, this is a huge public health disaster, which, of course, you can't really blame too many people on this as to why it's happening.
Hmm.
But again, I think there is no short answer to this. I think what the crisis is exposing is a
Hmm.
lot of the long-standing problems we've already known, but they're now coming to the light. Right. So the fact that migrants could not access social security outside their place of birth, that was a thing which we knew, but now it's going to get more salience. The fact that public health issue, even in normal, so-called normal times, was really bad.
Hmm.
Hopefully now people, the economic case against it was, we don't know the
Hmm.
numbers, we should not spend too much because we don't want overcapacity. I think the case now, there's a strong case for overcapacity rather than
Hmm.
undercapacity, which means one is basic healthcare infrastructure. But take the example of ventilators. I think globally now there's a recognition that we have more missiles, bombs, and nuclear stockpiles than something as simple as ventilators. And this is true not just for India, even the US and so on. So I think there should be a dramatic rethink on how much investment has to be done in public health. And I think what is going to stand out is the state of Kerala, because Kerala, for all its faults, has India's best, I would argue, best public health infrastructure. And they're showing, how to deal with the crisis. Phenomenal sort of state services in that. I think there are many aspects of Kerala's thing which should not be emulated, but this is something which should be a public health infrastructure.
Okay, so if at all the lockdown is lifted on May 3rd, what are the practical asks in terms of ensuring a phased return or wage assurances that can be demanded out of the government?
Yeah, they have to give like literally bonuses. Like, this is, I mean, I work at, I am Ahmedabad, so I see this placement process every year, and students get, lakhs and lakhs of rupees. And the best way to get good students and this thing is to offer bonus packages. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see, and this is going to happen very naturally. The market is going to dictate this. The market is going to see the shortage of labor, and it's going to basically start bidding up the wage. So it's going to happen very automatically. And I should just say that this has happened 100 years before as well. Not many people know that the roots of India's trade union politics, some argue, took place in Bombay because of the plague in 1896-98, where about half the population of Bombay emptied out because of the plague, and the cotton textile mills, wanted labor. So whoever they could get, they had to give huge concessions, and labor basically fought back and got those concessions, and that's what then triggered eventually labor movements, working class movements in India. And so there's a hope that this strange situation that we're going to see in the month of May will trigger some massive rethink in terms of what needs to be done. I think construction sector in particular, they have been fairly ruthless in terms of when it comes to employment. Almost everything is contractualized and very paid pittance. I think they should be providing. I mean, most of them don't provide creches as per law. They're supposed to be providing creches for families and so on. So, in fact, I have a potential meeting with the real estate authorities of India who want some ideas of what can be done for migrant labor on construction side. And so I think these are great opportunities for people to advocate for good labor conditions, labor rights, especially on construction sites, given the massive demand that's going to take place for labor going forward. Yeah.
So, given the current situation, do you think that it's going to happen, that this advocacy on our part is actually going to result into something, or is it just a hope that we have?
I mean, one can be from past experience. Of course, we know that Indian governments successively of different political stripes have done very little for the unorganized sector in general. Small, like Ayushman Bharat is a step in the right direction from this government. Earlier government did Manrega. So of course, some good measures have come about with this recognition. I mean, the earlier UPA government had come out with this massive report on the unorganized sector. But it has to be much more. It has to be. I think this universal basic income has to come about. There has to be a lot more on pensions, a lot more on the health side in particular. I mean, literally, can we think of a health system where it's virtually free, like the NHS in Britain, for example? I think the time has come to literally, think of some really bold things where the state actually funds most of it. Like in Kerala, I mean, that's a huge thing that's happened in Kerala. So yeah, so I think that would be the broad thing.
Okay, so the next question is personally addressed to you. Have you, as an expert, ever been a part of any committee of the state? And also, why is it that the government did not consult public health experts who could have included the economic perspective with the medical perspective you spoke about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, so I've been a part of two exercises in 2016 for the Economic Survey of India, which is a document prepared before the budget, where in chapter 12, we wrote a chapter on migration, which for the first time argued that migration in India is much more than what the census numbers tell us. And it's an issue that has to be reckoned with. And the other was this 2017 working group report. Now that working group report is available online. But of course, like many other reports commissioned by the government, now, very little has been done. For example, one of the things we argued in that report was portable social security. And of course, happy to see that someone picked up the idea, and the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Ram Vilas Paswan, announced last month that they're going to roll out that scheme later this year in June. I think they are now saying it might be postponed because of this current uncertainty, but I think it should be brought forward. Of course, as a as an academic, then you can do research, you can write, you can be part of committees, but eventually the implementation has to be from somebody in policy circles. So all you can do is advocacy. Sometimes these things work. For example, Manrega is one of India's greatest social security nets. Happened after 10 years of research, advocacy from academics, from activists, from a variety of people, and finally we have the world's largest rural social safety net called the Manrega, which now even this government, which doesn't like the Manrega, has to rely on. So policies, whether you like it or not, come about the outcome at the end, after a lot of advocacy by academics, activists, and variety of stakeholders. And so on migration, hopefully this will be the moment where people wake up, because this thing has, until the early 2000s, the policy stance on migration in India was that migration is bad. That almost had this Gandhian connotation that we need to focus on developing rural areas so that nobody will have to migrate. It sounds very great on paper, saying that wow, cities are congested, why have more migrants? Let us develop our villages so that nobody has to move. And it sounds very poetic, but that's not how the world works. And what we've seen in India is just the opposite. That is, the minute villages get prosperous, actually more people start leaving, for the simple reason that aspirations change and nobody wants to do back-breaking agricultural work. And so you see the prosperous parts of Indian agriculture, people have left. So there's a very misplaced concern. So obviously you want rural development, but I think policy circles only in the last 10 years have started recognizing that with rural development, you actually sometimes get more migration, and that has to be recognized. This inevitability of migration is only now being recognized. And so there's a whole policy switch taking place in the last 5 to 10 years, from rootedness to understanding that migration is inevitable, and how do we facilitate better and safer migrations. And it's in that context that this working group was set up in 2017 or 2016, which I was a part of. As I said, it's not like the government has listened to everything. And the question is, more like, why is not the government not listening? It's the prerogative of the government, whether to take advice or not. Maybe the advice you're giving is faulty, right? So that is the decision that the government has to take on what it's doing. But definitely, it did seem that in the lockdown, nobody really thought about migrants, which was very surprising. And all it can point out to is a very thin or a closed decision body making, which we saw during demonetization. And the government was very happy to say that, only 3 or 4 people knew about the idea. It was a well-kept secret. Well, that was a problem, that only 3 or 4 people knew about it, because obviously more people were consulted, you would find out that, so many other issues had to be tackled. So maybe the centralized nature of decision making is a problem.
Okay. So do you think that this could make a shift to the focus on rural economy by the state? That all of this is going to, has the potential to lead them to actually focusing on rural economy and pay more attention to it?
It's hard to say. I think what we've seen systematically is public investment in agriculture going down since the 90s. A lot of people think that, the Indian government the state has withdrawn and so on. Actually, nothing like that. The state has become even more powerful in terms of spending since the 1990s. Like Manrega, for example, the government spends a lot of money on that. But what the government has spent less on is investment in agriculture. And so, a lot of, again, committees and reports have advocated what to do. They have this grand ambition, doubling of farmers' income by 2022 or something like that. We all know that it's not going to happen. Focus on agricultural areas, I think, again, it depends on this being a state subject. Huge variation across states. Some states have taken it up much more seriously than others. For example, Andhra Pradesh has done, Telangana, for example, under KCR, has done some fantastic schemes on agrarian reforms and so on. Whereas, a place like Bihar, for example, is still struggling with that. So there's very little, actually, when you think hard about it, very little that the center can do on agriculture. It's pretty much a state level issue. And will this pandemic lead to more focus on agrarian issues? I mean, I don't see that per se, unless there's a mass famine because production stalls or because production is not reaching other places in the next 1 year. Then yes, production will have to ramp up. Again, the last time we had a pandemic, as I said, 1918 influenza, the sector most hit was agriculture. because for the simple reason that so many people died, 15 million people died, a lot of them were farmers. The agricultural output of that year basically fell dramatically, and you had a virtual sort of famine situation. So you had prices rising, and people and the output falling. Bizarre situation. So hopefully things are not so bad this time around.
Okay, so we just have two more questions now. Are there any signs that anything fundamental will change at the socio-political level? Say, for example, less dependence on capitalism, exploitative models, or more trust in socialist models?
Yeah, I do think this is a good time. As I said, economists, like Ken said, right? Economists, even people who think they're free from all influences, are usually enslaved by the ideas of some defunct economist. And what's interesting is that a lot of economists are coming to this consensus of more social security, which has just not been on the discourse as a consensus issue for a long time now. So definitely, I think there's a huge rethink that's going to take place on that front. The other interesting thing, I think, which from again, I'm talking because I'm a person who's trained in economics and I work in an economics area, is on environment. I think what this pandemic has shown is, the tremendous value of this cleaner air and so on, that things that seemed feasible and almost unthinkable a month back. I think a lot of economists will seriously start thinking about these trade-offs and how does one sort of plan out production and consumption so that we actually start enjoying such benefits. So obviously nobody wants to have an indefinite lockdown just because there's clean air. But the fact that you can achieve this clean air will, I think, force a lot of rethink in how we arrange economic activities. But for that, you have to be very ambitious and bold. But I'm sure that some places of the world will start doing that. Will it lead to deglobalization, more localized production? I'm not so sure. I think globalization, the kind of explosion that happened in the last 20 years, is almost irreversible. And once this pandemic is over, people will go back to consuming things from around the world. So I don't think that is going to change fundamentally. Though I think Holland has started something called as a donut economic model, where they're going to start production, and they're going to basically start having a more localized economy. I'm not too gung ho about. I mean, I don't think that will happen. But definitely, economists are going to be talking more on social security and on the environment, thankfully, than in the past.
So since you mentioned globalization, do you think this whole idea of localizing is also in one way or the other going to increase the rise of the nationalist feeling or authoritarianism in countries? Because that's already on the rise.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of this whole localization model, is because all said and done, human beings have had tremendous, believe it or not, freedom from wars, which was literally until 1945 a source of mass casualties across the world. And since 1945, what you've seen is precisely because of economic integration, the fact of not political integration, but the idea that if economies are intertwined, you're less likely to go to a war with the other person. And that's something which I strongly believe in, and that's why, for example, people say the European Union will collapse. If it does, it would be a disaster, because Europe is a place where people have been fighting for centuries and centuries, and it's precisely because of the European Union that you've got tremendous peace in Europe for the last 50 years. So I hope that ideas on localization. I think what I'm saying is I agree with you that these ideas on localization will make us more hyper-nationalist and increase the chances of war, right? And so I don't think it's a very good idea.
Okay, so yeah, last question to end it. We've all discussed the repercussions and the negatives that come along with. What are the few positives that you see in the social sector or in the environmental sector that COVID-19 has brought to us?
Yeah, I think the value of, as I said, I think some more empathy with workers. I think hopefully that should be realized and also, articulated by our political leadership and the environment. I think this appreciation, it's possible to live in, a city with clean air. Now the challenge is how do you do it in times of normal, without lockdowns. I think hopefully will lead to some very innovative, brainstorming. And the fact that there's going to be a labor shortage, which will actually mean that labor will have more power vis-a-vis capital in the coming months in India, is going to be actually a very interesting situation. And so, it's like, again, from a very deep history perspective, much
Hmm.
of European history, people argue, was rewritten by the plague of 1348, which wiped out one third of Europe's population. And in a very
Hmm.
bizarre way, that kind of changed all the political relations, changed all the labor capital relations, feudal relations in Europe going forward. So obviously, we don't have such high mortality, or we're not expecting such high mortality in India. But the temporary shortage of labor, I think, will drive up a lot of bargaining power, and so hopefully that leads to some good, good things in the coming few months.
All right. So, ending this webinar with the hopeful note. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm like on behalf of Shamil, we're very grateful that you could take out the time and address the audience. Thank you to the audience as well for staying with us and having the patience to go through it. It was a lovely talk, Chinmay. And
Great.
yes, wish you
Thank
a
you.
good
Thank you
day.
for having me on.
Yes. See you. Bye.
Bye.